Another day, another win for the Trump administration. Supreme Court giving it the green light, the administration the green light to move ahead with plans to curb the federal workforce after lower court judges put a stop on DOJ cuts. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was the only dissenting vote, writing, quote, "This court sees fit to step in now and release the president's wrecking ball at the outset of this litigation. This decision is not only truly unfortunate but also hubristic and senseless." Fox News contributor and GW Law professor Jonathan Turley joins us now. Professor Turley, so great to see you this morning. So hubristic is kind of an interesting word for a member of the Supreme Court to use about the president using his executive actions. It's particularly interesting from this justice. It was not long ago that Justice Barrett went after Justice Jackson for what she described as basically an imperial judiciary. And on this occasion, Jackson is alone. She couldn't even get Justice Sotomayor to sign on to this dissent. Keep in mind what Sotomayor noted in her concurrence is that this order simply was having agencies plan for downsizing, and she said we can hardly stop that. Well, yeah, Jackson believes you can, and this is part of a signature of what's becoming a type of judicial abandon that Jackson has towards the power of these courts. And we've seen this interesting progression. It was in these injunction cases. In an earlier case Justices Sotomayor and Jackson lost Justice Kagan who would not sign on. Now Jackson has lost Justice Sotomayor and she is the sole dissenter. So I want to move on to the next topic, but real quickly, what does it tell you that obviously the court is out of session but they decided to weigh in on this kind of sending another message about these lower court injunctions. What does all that tell you? The court could not be more clear. This is another shot across the bow to lower courts that they've got to knock this off. They've got to stop with these injunctions. This is 6 months of delay. It could have been much longer, and the court is signaling we're going to be on you very quickly if you continue to do these types of orders. So onto this it's very we learned later yesterday evening that the FBI has launched a criminal investigation into John Brennan and James Comey. Obviously there's a lot that is sort of unusual and probably a little bit uncomfortable about this, but when you go back and you look at what Brennan and Comey did in 2015-2016 back before when President Trump was running the first time, it's kind of shocking the actions they took under perhaps with the direction of the Obama administration. We don't entirely know all of the details about that, but what they did to take the U.S. and investigative intelligence services and turn it against the administration's main political opponent. Well, Charlie, I think we left that comfort zone about 9 years ago. In 2016, President Obama and the Intelligence Committee were informed that Hillary Clinton was planning to unleash an attack on Trump, suggesting that he was a tool of Russia. Obama was later briefed on that. And then in 2017, you had Brennan over the objections of people in the Intelligence Committee, including the Steele dossier and this intelligence assessment. And keep in mind that the FBI was told early on that they were wrong about this stuff. They were wrong about pursuing some of these individuals, including an individual who was an asset of the CIA, not a spy. That was the basis for all of this. And yet Brennan still overruled them. Now that was not what he suggested to Congress in his testimony. As for Comey, he's all over this. And when he has been questioned in the past, the lights would go out and he would say in one case it didn't ring a bell. I don't recall anyone raising the Hillary Clinton conspiracy in 2016. It's hard to imagine what would stick in your mind if that didn't. But these are very sophisticated individuals. The question is, were they too clever by half in their testimony before Congress? Right. So the obvious charges would be lying to Congress or something like that. Are there other like prosecutorial abuses that they could be potentially charged with if something like that was uncovered, and they had clear evidence of it? Well, there are, but some statute of limitations have passed. Comey was involved in the leaking of information. If you recall, he took FBI material with him when he was fired and then used a third party to get it to the media. It was a shocking violation of FBI protocols. But the key about these investigations is that you're going to have a new round of questions, and there's a law called 18 U.S.C. 1, and that makes it a crime to give false statements to any federal investigator, right? So, they're going to be called again to answer these questions, and that clock will start again. And of course, they've used those exact same charges against other people. Jonathan Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Charlie. But first, breaking tonight, President Trump slamming former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey amid an FBI probe surrounding them. Fox's told the investigators are looking at potential wrongdoing by the pair during an investigation into the 2016 presidential election that alleged Russia sought to interfere with the election to benefit then-candidate Trump. Correspondent David Spun has been following the story for us all day long and joins me now. Good evening to you, David. Aisha, good evening to you. Both James Comey and John Brennan stood at the center of the Trump-Russia collusion investigation that plagued the president's first term in office. And almost a decade later, they may face criminal charges. I think they're crooked as hell. And maybe they have to pay a price for that. And I believe they are truly bad people and dishonest people. So whatever happens happens. Fox Digital first to report that current CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently turned over evidence to the FBI regarding allegations that former CIA Director John Brennan potentially lied to Congress about his involvement in the Russia investigation. As for James Comey, the former FBI director Trump fired in 2017, the scope of that investigation is unclear. However, two sources briefed on both probes tell Fox their actions could equate to a potential conspiracy. Brennan defending himself today. Quite frankly, I'm really shocked that, individuals who are willing to sacrifice their reputations, their credibility, their decency to continue to do Donald Trump's bidding on something that clearly is just politically based. President Trump has personally called out both men for years over the Russia probe, one that failed to prove any significant collusion between the 2016 Trump campaign and the Kremlin. The infamous Steele dossier, unsubstantiated allegations about Trump funded by Democrats, was included in a 2017 CIA intelligence community assessment. At Brennan's urging, according to newly released CIA records, however, in 2023, Brennan testified to Congress he was opposed to including the dossier. John Brennan knew all about the dossier. So Comey is a little bit different because we don't have him on tape quite like we do John Brennan. But with Brennan, it's just like a buffet of lies. It is important to note that tonight we are talking about investigations. Any charges would likely come from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, with the approval of Attorney General Pam Bondi. But even before we get there, a grand jury would have to agree to indict. No comment directly from Mr. Comey or Mr. Brennan to Fox News on this story. Aisha, David Spunt live for us. David, thank you. And another story, former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing related to the Trump-Russia probe, according to sources at the Justice Department. And Josh Holmes, as co-host of the Ruthless podcast, joins us now. Thank you for being here. Here's a little bit from a memo that John Ratcliffe put out called Lessons Learned on the 2016 Russia collusion story. The decision by agency heads to include the Steele dossier in the ran counter to fundamental tradecraft raft principles and ultimately undermined the credibility of key judgment. I think a lot of Democrats might have expected this story to just go away, but it is not. And now you have this development with possible an FBI investigation underway, criminal investigation. Josh. Yeah, good morning Dana. This is a long time coming in my view. This is the investigation that should have been happening in 2017 rather than the Russian collusion investigation. John Brennan is one of the most nakedly political humans to ever serve as an intelligence chief in this country and almost any other. That's a pretty high bar if you think about it. But if you take a rewind of the tape and look back, it was John Brennan who briefed Hillary Clinton's campaign on the Russian collusion narrative while he was doing all this with the Steele dossier. He was at least aware of the Clinton campaign's opinion that they wanted to inject this false narrative into the waning days of the 2016 campaign. We know that from notes that were disclosed by him. And then he tried to run cover by going to congressional leaders, then Speaker Ryan, then Leader McConnell to try to get them to sign off and provide cover for what Hillary Clinton was claiming. Fortunately, they refused to do so at the time. But then after he got out of office, this is one of the biggest purveyors of misinformation on this narrative anywhere in the world. At least this side of Adam Schiff, This is a guy who signed a whole bunch of television contracts who then sort of wink and nod and just believe me because I've got the intelligence that you're not privy to that all of this is on the up and up. This is absolutely catastrophic in terms of the American people's trust of our intelligence services, and it all goes back to people like John Brennan. I'm glad this investigation is happening. With regard to Comey, he's not immune to controversy. Here's a few of them. Walking on the beach, he found that assortment of shells, right? 8,647, meaning get rid of the president. The Trump-Russia probe that you just referred to. Republicans say he politicized the FBI clearly when he was the leader of that group. And leaking classified memos are the accusations as well. Josh, oftentimes these cases go nowhere in Washington D.C. However, this time there are new bosses in town, a few new sheriffs in town, one big main sheriff in town. Do you think the outcome will be different because of those people who now have these jobs and they have authority to investigate? It may very well, Bill. I mean, look, I think that there's critics are going to contend that this is, some sort of a retribution campaign by the Trump administration, but it's not. It's about something much larger than that, Bill. I mean, what we're talking about is that we already understand what Jim Comey and what Brennan and others were doing was unprofessional, morally bankrupt, inaccurate, didn't serve the country well. We know that for a fact. What we don't know is whether or not it was criminal and whether or not they engaged in a larger campaign with government hats on to try to undermine a Trump campaign and ultimately a Trump administration. That is what we're going to find out. And if they do find those ties, we're going to get into criminal territory. I don't think that this administration is interested in trying to sweep any of this under the rug. That's for sure. No. I just wrote down 51 national security officials, all the ones who said that the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation. I mean, these waters apparently run very deep. Josh, thanks. Great to have you today. Yeah, thank you, Josh. Thanks, guys. More to come on that. President Trump firing his first shot at the deep state that tried to hobble his first term. Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing related to Trump and the Russia probe, according to sources at the Justice Department. Earlier, President Trump weighed on whether he wants to see anybody locked up. Do you want to see these two guys behind bars? Well, I know nothing about it other than what I read today, but I will tell you I think they're very dishonest people. I think they're crooked as hell and maybe they have to pay a price for that. I believe they are truly bad people and dishonest people. So, whatever happens happens. And the former CIA Director John Brennan is responding by doubling down on the Russia investigation. I stand behind the assessment. I think the assessment has stood the test of time and again I point to those reviews that were done in a political nonpartisan fashion. I want to make sure that people understand exactly what the Russians were doing to try to interfere in our very solemn domestic election system. All right, Dana, is it hard to believe the FBI director and the CIA director conspired in their testimony to Congress? Well, the whole thing is hard to believe because it's not believable in terms of the Russia collusion scandal. And the Democrats are still paying a price for that. And on all sorts of ways, right? They lament the loss of trust in our institutions. And then you go back to, well, what about this? Everything you can point to that they're mad about you go but what about that? And I think what Jonathan Turley said is really important. He said that does this cross the line into perjury, and that's where there might be a rub, right? So that's why I think the criminal investigation makes sense. I hope that there's not too many more leaks out of it to try to water it down. Like if they have a case, go forward with the case. If they don't, then okay, they'll have to admit that. But what happened to President Trump was beyond political dirty tricks. This was so extremely damaging. Maybe hurt the Democratic Party for a long time, but certainly when you don't have trust in the intelligence community, in the media, many of whom now pretend like they never wrote about it at all. Well, the CIA released a lessons learned review of Russian collusion. Was that enough, Jesse? Well, that might be the predicate for these charges because it turns out these guys both knew that the Russia hoax was cooked up by Crooked and they pushed it anyway. They sabotaged and spied on his campaign and tried to take down his presidency, and then they got caught red-handed. And we'll find out if there was a conspiracy or whether they lied too. Congress. And I hope they pay the price, but they might not because a lot of these guys skate all the time. So, I'm not going to get my hopes up. You saw what happened with Epstein. You know, you get your hopes up and then all of a sudden, poof, everything disappears. So, the Justice Department and the FBI have a lot riding on these prosecutions. I'd like to see justice, but it's like you get guys out there that say that there's this pipe bomb at the DNC and then would ever happen to that? What about the Vegas shooter? Remember how suspicious that whole thing was? Poof, that disappears. You know, all these things always come across and then they just disappear and it's very frustrating for the American people. Yeah, I said it's like, where did this guy go? Where did that whole case go? Where did all the files go? They just went nowhere. No one even believes that. So, you got to go after these guys and you have to go after them hard because the American people aren't going to tolerate the corruption. You got someone like Nancy Pelosi, her stock portfolio went up $40 million last year. That's more than any hedge fund in the United States. And her husband's not even a professional investor. He owns a vineyard and then Joe Biden's taken millions from the Chinese all over the table. He got nothing to show for it. And at the end of the day, he pardons his whole family and walks out the door and then his stupid doctor pleads the fifth under oath. No one is going to get punished for any of this stuff. It just seems like Trump's people always go to jail and these Democrats and these deep state darlings always skate. Well, you have a point there, Jesse. That's right. So many good points. But politics is dirty, Harold. And Hillary Clinton at one point, you know, reports of her digging up dirt on Donald Trump. Of course, that's how you play the game, isn't it? No, I hope not. I hope not. I think President Trump, every president's elected to govern, not to settle scores. And I'm just a forward-looking person. I think the president when I think of the things that should be high on the list of a president for asking his FBI director to do investigating a former FBI director and CIA director for what you believe they may have done to you. When you consider TikTok is still shaping and reinforcing bad habits, social media companies are developing algorithms that affect young women, young girls' self-esteem. When you consider the gangs, cyber and street, it's interesting. I love the fact that the president's sending ICE in to help get the worst of the worst out of our communities who are immigrants, but heck, I wish he'd send the Marines into Chicago and Detroit and DC and New York and Memphis and Denver and places where people can't have their kids walk outside of their homes because they're scared in the evenings here as we get into the summer months. So, I just hope the president looks forward. This is just not the way I think about it. When you talk about the dirtiness, I don't know if it's dirty, but President Trump is selling phones, perfumes, Bibles, and Bitcoin. Well, what was Hunter Biden selling? What was he selling? Right. But hear me out. I criticized him. I criticized President Biden's art. I criticized President Biden for that. In fairness, everybody around this table is my pal, but we've not criticized him. All right, big story today. The FBI is set to investigate its former director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan over their involvement in the Trump-Russia probe. According to sources at the Justice Department, Brennan is under investigation for lying to Congress, saying that he had nothing to do with the Steele dossier. Reports indicate that Brennan's top two CIA officers warned the director it's a conspiracy. But Brennan allegedly pushed hard for them to use the dossier as an argument in their report anyway. Now, as for Comey, reports say that he knew that the probe originally came from the Clinton campaign and still allegedly used it to both smear and investigate President Trump. A story that the mainstream media ran with for 2 years. Watch this. This cloud about collusion with Russia will hang over him no matter where he stands. It does look like he's listening to Putin more than he is American intelligence. We're about to find out if the new president of our country is going to do what Russia wants. The presidency is effectively a Russian op. The president is a Russian operative. Amazing, right? So, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt joined Prime Time last night saying the administration is now ready to prosecute the deep state. Watch this. Both of these disgraceful individuals turned against our Constitution and our country. And I'm sure they did in fact lie to Congress, and it's up to the Department of Justice to investigate that and to prosecute them if they did. And what we have seen is corruption at the highest levels against President Trump. The deep state threw everything at him to prevent him from coming back to this big, beautiful White House behind me, and he prevailed. All right. Emily, let me start with you. You go back and you look at the testimony of Brennan, the CIA director, repeatedly saying that that he believed that the dossier should be part of the investigation and then shouldn't be part of it depending on whether he was behind closed doors or in front of them, right? And that is the nexus, it looks like, that John Ratcliffe, the current CIA director, believes could prove that he was lying. He lied to Congress in a closed-door investigation. So, where do you see this going? I see there being clearly grounds for an investigation. And I actually see, if I have faith in anyone, it's this administration to see it fully through. Now, we know that Comey too downplayed the reliance on the dossier and overstated the cooperation. And then, as you just said, Brennan essentially said, we didn't rely on the dossier at all for that intelligence community assessment. But I was so disheartened as an American to read what has now been declassified in that page-and-a-half footnote. For example, talking about that are the good Americans at the CIA and other intelligence apparati that said, look, we have low confidence. There's not corroboration here. This doesn't pass muster. The credibility is poor. And yet to see that there was an insistence on including it in something that became paramount. And drove a media just a vehicle, a public uproar vehicle that drove this narrative that was entirely false. It goes so much beyond politicization. But here legally, obviously intent is key, context matters and precedent is real but rare. So I think however that the grounds should all of these allegations prove to be true with all of these corroborations which again with this declassified information certainly resoundingly support that these guys have a lot to answer for because it seems like indeed they knowingly lied before Congress of exactly their involvement and exactly why and what drove them to include this falsities into something that became such a crux for our political theater. Joe, I think about the media and I think about Ben Rhodes, I believe it was, saying, we sort of look for this cycle between the press and what we have our folks saying who are in the inside. Right. And it creates this nexus where everybody is believing this whole environment of this Russia collusion that really did fall apart under the Mueller investigation. I mean it just to boil it down the question is the CIA director and the FBI director were they colluding on their own to create an environment where they built this narrative about Russia collusion and they kept feeding it from every direction in order to block the Trump administration? I think we can answer that question definitively by looking at the way that James Comey, the head of the FBI, former head of the FBI, fired and James Clapper, who was the head of the DNI, and then obviously John Brennan, head of the CIA. What did they do after they left their positions or were fired? Let's see. We had Brennan went to MSNBC where you literally can't tell the difference between him and Rachel Maddow in terms of his analysis. Clapper is signed by CNN. Same reason. How much anti-Trump stuff can you give us on Russia as possible? James Comey wrote 2 anti-Trump books, got a Showtime series in his honor, and then he's playing with seashells on the beach calling for the elimination of the president. So based on their actions after the fact, these were not apolitical actors, especially when you hear them do any interview on TV. Yeah, Arthele, the thing that often strikes me when I look back at all of this is the fact that when Jim Comey had this dossier and this information, he went to give a briefing to Hillary Clinton, talked to her about the different influences that they needed to beware about in their campaign. But when he went to Trump, he didn't tell him any of this. Why? Why not? Why do you think he didn't tell President Trump, look, we're afraid there might be some people in your campaign who might be soft targets for some infiltration from Russia. So, we want you to be aware of this, sir, because we don't want this to drag you down. No, they didn't say a word about it. Well, to your point, intention, you said it, Emily, intention is everything. So, that is going to be the big question. How do you prove his intention? But I got to tell you something. I don't think anybody on either side of the political aisle, they're done with Comey. I think the Democrats can have him be put in a box and go away and live your life. And same for the Republicans. So that is going to be I'm interested to see how much resources and time that the FBI will spend on this investigation should it take place, because you have to remember I think that the administration, the FBI, CIA, they're going to read the tea leaves, and if America doesn't have the appetite for it any longer because it's been done forever and again, this guy can just go away. So, we'll see how it unfolds. I mean, I'm not done with him. I think this is what you call poetic justice. For me, the corruption and the collusion all hinges. I think the clearest example of it is that January 6, 2017 Trump Tower meeting, when then FBI Director James Comey as well as Brennan briefed then President-elect Donald Trump about the salacious details of the dossier, because guess what? The media wouldn't publish it because they knew it was bunk. They knew it was bogus and they needed that hook. And so James Comey briefed President-elect Donald Trump, gave then that meeting was leaked to the press, gave the media the hook to publish the dossier in full, which then led to all this chaos. And we know James Comey is a leaker because he's admitted it before Congress that he would give memos to his Columbia professor buddy who then leaked to the press. So to me, and also at the time of this Trump Tower meeting, James Comey and Brennan knew that the CIA believed that the dossier was bogus, that it was an internet rumor, and that it was Democrat paid for opposition research. So to me, that's the clearest example of the collusion and the corruption. And I'm not done with them. All right, we'll see. We'll see if the American people are not. They're by a Fox News digital exclusive. Sources say that the Justice Department is investigating former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan in connection with the investigation of President Trump and Russia. No details about what they are looking at with Comey, but with Brennan reportedly suspected of possibly making false statements to Congress. Former House Oversight Committee Chair and Intel Committee member Trey Gowdy questioned CIA Director Brennan about all of this during what became known as the Russia investigation. Do you know whether any of the underlying allegations made in the Steele dossier were ever tested, probed, examined, cross-examined, whether the sources were examined for reliability, credibility? I know that there were efforts made by the Bureau to try to understand whether or not any of the information in that was valid, but I don't have any first-hand knowledge of it. Did the CIA rely on it? No. Why not? Because it wasn't part of the corpus of intelligence information that we had. It was not in any way used as a basis for the intelligence community assessment that was done. Yeah, that's a problem for John Brennan right there. Trey Gowdy joins me, host of Sunday Night in America and here on Fox, and he joins me now. Great to have you with us, Trey Gowdy, and great to look back at everybody loved watching Trey Gowdy handle those moments because an oversight. It was a huge responsibility to try to pick this apart, but John Brennan's problem is that in one place behind closed doors he's saying that it was included in the report, that he wanted it to be included in the report, and then on the other hand he's saying they didn't need it. We had so much evidence, we didn't need the dossier, which we all know was a Clinton-funded piece of campaign material, IAL Oppo research essentially. So how do you see this investigation from the DOJ? What is meriting it and where do you think this is going to go? Well, I knew he was lying then. I mean, that was an open hearing, Martha. So as you know, you can't discuss classified information. But if you will look over my shoulder at that hearing, you'll see a familiar face. One Kash Patel, the current FBI director. We knew that Brennan was lying. That's why I wanted him on record. They relied heavily on the dossier. John Brennan knew all about the dossier. So Comey is a little bit different because we don't have him on tape quite like we do John Brennan. But with Brennan, it's just like a buffet of lies. You can literally go through the buffet and pick out which one you want. The guy that replaced me on that committee is a guy named John Lee Ratcliffe, who's the CIA director. So there are not two people in the world who know more about John Brennan's problem with the truth than Kash Patel and John Ratcliffe. And I'm very, very happy that they are looking into it. Overdue. Well, let's go to number 2 here. This is a quote from Fox reporting on the newly declassified email to Brennan from former deputy CIA director in 2016 warning Brennan about the credibility or lack thereof of the dossier. This is coming from his deputy at CIA. So in it, the message said that including the dossier in in any capacity jeopardized, quote, the credibility of the entire paper. This deputy said and added Brennan ultimately formalized his position in Writing stating this is Brennan that quote, "My bottom line is that I believe that the information warrants inclusion in the report completely different from what he said to you in that soundbite Trey oh it's worse than that Martha he and Comey insisted that it be included and why did they insist because their hatred for Donald Trump. Look, we knew Brennan hated Donald Trump. It just took a little longer for Comey's hatred to manifest itself, but what we're seeing now is it existed all along. Their hatred for Donald Trump trumped or overcame their objectivity. They're the ones who insisted that's something that really wouldn't be fit for the National Enquirer. I mean, it's literally paid for by the opposition. Judges have criticized it. We went back and said, okay, Brennan said you made efforts to corroborate the dossier. Let us see where you tried to do it. And it's just a blank piece of paper. They made no effort. I wouldn't be surprised, Martha, if we didn't figure out those two were behind the leaks to the media. What they really wanted is the media to report Trump is under investigation for ties to Russia. So, they got what they wanted. They didn't get the result they wanted, which was him losing the election. Yeah, this is not what you would expect is laid out here from the director of the CIA and the director of the FBI. And people wonder why the approval numbers and their credibility numbers shrank so dramatically over the course of this period. So, it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes and we'll look to you as we follow the story. Trey, thank you very much. Trey Gowdy, watch for you on Sunday night as always. Thank you. He's live here in Washington. David, hi John. News of the investigation's not a total surprise. There have been rumblings this may happen soon, but nevertheless, here we are. The scope of the two probes into former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey not crystal clear, but we do have some details to share this afternoon. For the Brennan probe, Fox Digital's Brooke Singman reports that the current CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, turned over information recently to the FBI regarding Brennan potentially lying to Congress. Fox Digital reports the probe surrounds testimony to Congress and the FBI Director Kash Patel fully involved in that investigation. As for Mr. Comey, the former FBI director fired by President Trump in 2017. That investigation is underway within the halls of the DOJ. But the specifics though are unclear. Two sources though describe actions of the two men as part of a potential quote conspiracy which could widen legal exposure. The White House out with reaction shortly after the news broke last night. I'm glad to hear it because both of these disgraceful individuals turned against our Constitution and our country and I'm sure they did in fact lie to Congress and it's up to the Department of Justice to investigate that and to prosecute them if they did. Department of Justice officially not commenting right now. We're talking investigations though, John. Any actual charges would likely come from the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, with the approval of Attorney General Pam Bondi. But even before we get to that step, a grand jury would have to agree to indict. No comment from Comey or Brennan to Fox on this story. We'll see where the investigation goes. David Spence setting the table for us. David, thank you. Sandra, all right. Thank you very much, David. Hewitt is the host of the Hugh Hewitt Show on Fox News. Also a Fox News contributor. Good to have you on the program, sir. So, where do you see this going? Thank you, Sandra. I see this going deep into 18 U.S.C. 1001. That's the False Statement Act. If you've made a false statement to any federal official and testifying to Congress falls into that, you're guilty of a felony, and the statute of limitations is 5 years. The stories that I have read about Mr. Brennan date the initial offense under 18 U.S.C. 10001 to his congressional testimony in 2023. I don't see it linked to anything specific with regards to Mr. Comey, but if you go back to the 2023 congressional testimony by a then private citizen Brennan, he suggested at that time, in fact, he stated that he had not had anything to do with the inclusion of the Steele dossier in the briefing of the then President-elect Trump in 2017. The note released by the CIA this week and on which Director Ratcliffe has commented contradicts that and therefore there is at least a resolution that has to be found and possibly an indictment that will follow whether or not Mr. Brennan lied. I do want to remind the audience this is what got General Flynn originally convicted was a false statements case made on a much thinner red than what is being alleged to occur here. But no professional prosecutor will get out ahead of a case like this and say he lied until they're ready to take it to the grand jury. Yeah, And Ratcliffe telling the New York Post in that interview to which you just referred Obama's Trump-Russia collusion report was corrupt from the start. According to the CIA review, this was Obama, Comey, Clapper, and Brennan deciding we're going to screw Trump. He said in that exclusive interview. Jonathan Turley weighed in last night. On with Laura Ingraham talking about why he says it is hard to believe Comey and Brennan's testimony. Listen here. There have been these long unanswered questions about what they told Congress. At points they both seem to adopt the Sergeant Schultz approach of I knew nothing. If only I knew I would have done something that didn't strike many as being very credible. Both of these tend to be somewhat of micromanagers. They take pride in the fact that they follow the details of their departments. I mean, in looking for evidence of wrongdoing, these are some of the key findings in the 2019 DOJ IG report on the Trump-Russia investigation. To remind everybody, the FBI omitted info on questionable claims by a Steele source. FBI omitted info from people who questioned Steele's work. The FBI omitted info on Steele's work going to the Clinton campaign among other things. But bottom line, the big question here, is did they lie in that testimony to Congress? And above anything, were the American people misled? Those are the two questions, not just to Congress. Did they lie to any federal official in the course of any investigatory proceeding, including any internal proceeding that the agency ran in its after-action report? What Director Ratcliffe released and what he commented on was the intelligence community's own internal review of the intelligence community assessment that was used to ambush then-President-elect Trump. And I would ask the audience, just compare the 6 months that Donald Trump just had, the most successful 6 months of any president of my adult lifetime, with the first 6 months in his first term, which was a nightmare because of special counsel and because of this Steele dossier and the rumors that it launched. If one of those two men are responsible for the Steele dossier being included and then leaked to the media and then they lied about it, I hope they get the book thrown at them. But that's a lot of ifs. We don't know and we ought not to do to them what they are alleged to have done to Trump. Ambush and destroy their reputations before they have a chance to defend themselves. We'll see where the investigation leads. Hugh Witt, great to have you on the show today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sandra. Good to be here. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.